So I sit here before you today to talk about the anomaly of the Englishman. Now, it hopefully is apparent to you if you are English, and if not, then what you've heard of England outside as an American or as a continental European or part of the Commonwealth, is that the Englishman is a very unique character in many ways and has a long history of conservative traditionalism, we might call it, where there's an obedience and obeisance to certain institutionalized facts, what is organized and disorganized, what is systematic, what is unsystematic. All of these things have coalesced into the mind of an Englishman. What is allowed and isn't allowed is very peculiar and complex if you've never been there, lived there, and you're not familiar with how they treat things. It's almost like a club where it's tacit, all the rules are, rather than some explicit, this is how you must behave, as maybe a German would do. Now, this goes into a lot of things, but primarily the topic today will be on its politics and why specifically the Englishman is at a, do we want to say abyss? Complete catastrophic end to its political relevance, maybe, is even better. But in general, a nadir. It's incapable of rising out of what is this doldrums, this turgid, torpid water, because it lacks its traditions. And that goes into something we will talk about that Oswald Spengler here alludes to, and that we can refine a bit more clearly with modern or current examples. So Spengler starts with this in Our Decision to say, England won the primacy, not through her economic strength, which did not at first exist, but through the wise regimen of the nobility, Tory and Whig alike. England gained her wealth by battles, not by bookkeeping and speculation. That is why the English people, for all its liberal thinking and talking, remained in practice the most conservative in Europe. Conservative, that is, in the sense of preserving all past forms of power and even to the smallest ceremonial details, for all that they may smile or laugh outright at them, so long as no more powerful new form was in sight, so long were all the old ones retained. The two-party system, the government's way of detaching itself from Parliament when making decisions, the House of Lords, and the monarchy as a breaking element in critical situations. This instinct has saved England time upon time, and if it should now die out, it will mean the loss, not only of political, but of economic position in the world. Neither Mirabeau, Talleyrand, Metternich, nor Wellington understood anything about economics. Undoubtedly, they found pretexts in it, but how much worse if, in their place, an economic expert had tried to dictate politics. Once imperialism falls into the hands of economic and materialistic businessmen and ceases to be high policy, it very quickly sinks from the level of the interests of the economic governing class to that of the class war of the actual workers, and thus the great economic systems become disintegrated and pull down the great powers with them into the abyss. Now, Spengler obviously being prescient as he was, and does foretell exactly how this downfall occurred, because now we've seen England at its most shameful, basically, of the last 2 decades, which is, I guess, funnily enough, the irony maybe of winning a war means you then lose in the outcomes. So Pyrrhic victory, but without even potentially the long-term reflection that it was a victory at all. Winning a war, I think, is usually reflected in its consequences of the win. So if Caesar conquered Gaul, that was a win because you can see that the territory is absorbed to yours. Defending an ideal, like defending liberal democracy, gets you nothing. There's no conquest here other than maybe the defeat of the opposing ideology, but it doesn't garner you anything material, and doesn't garner anything you could say more staunch other than the bragging rights of being the victor for however many decades that still holds true. Now, if you're bragging about winning World War II as an Englishman today, you should be embarrassed because you have now had to reap what was sown in that war, which was basically the catastrophic deficit of a material loss. So you've lost all the good men that you ever had, all the leading nobles that you ever had, all the empire building that was done over the preceding 200 years to sacrifice into that to that war, and you also were supplanted by America as the great power in the world. So in many ways and cases, it's probably the most catastrophic event. If Britain had chosen to sit out World War II, rather than medal alongside France, then they would probably still be at the pinnacle, if not second tier, or at least equivalent to America in many of those ways, and have that global power still reside with them. But nevertheless, we are here. We're in the reality that they've chosen, and so what we can deal with then is the understanding of why England now suffers from what I would call this lackadaisical or zombification. Why has it gone from a glorious empire to a hubristic island penitentiary down to now what is a shade and a ghost of what it has been, haunting the world with its past triumphs? Well, it goes into a few things. Now, Spengler obviously really outlining the core tenets around this decline, saying that once they've lost their traditions, once they've lost the institutions, particularly around ruling classes, but also having the abolishment of the Whigs and then replacement by the Labour Party, and what concludes with that is basically a centrifugal force around labour politics, and labour in the sense of people actually working is abstracted out of money politics. So the materialistic affair of the class, and this is the person who's working in a factory or in a city, so like a megalopolis, basically has this inertia around their job and who they are, and that they get stuck in this, I'm a labour class, that's who I am, and identify with it. And the culmination of this into modern days is very much based around what you'll see, which is football clubs supporting, particularly from those rundown, crappy English towns and villages and cities. But then also you have pubs and the whole atmosphere around what working class means to me as a Labour voter for 40 years. Now, what you've got for voting for Labour for 40 years, and you can show me, is probably very paltry and embarrassing. But nevertheless, there's a certain misbegotten pride, misplaced pride around this, because there's a sense of duty to a class that no longer exists, but is seen as lauded for sentimental reasons. The English are very mawkish, and that's playing well into a system where they needed it to retain power, particularly the political class. It does not work in a modern society where you're just revering things that suck ass. The idea that England was better in the 50s and 60s is not true, and so anything other than maybe the ethnographics, so the demographics, were probably better. But the reason that you have terrible demographics in England, third worlders and everything, is because of the people you had in the 60s and 70s allowed them in. They had the notion of, let's help everyone even though we're all poor as dirt. Let's give them the pieces of dirt that we also have. And now what you've gotten is basically a surfeit of immigrants who are bloated the public purse to such a large degree that it's bankrupting England itself. And we'll see if Rachel Reeves, the current treasurer, is able to manage her way out of that. But it's a long-term chronic issue now where there's just a systemic decline of economic productivity. People will point to the Laffer curve, and they'll point to other traditions around raising taxes whilst the dwindling economy barely trudges on to survive. But it can be just forced as a basic understanding that a megalopolis needs a certain amount of economic intensity to provide for the rest of the country. And if that is deprived, so London obviously being shitty now, means that less people are moving there and less likely to grow that place. And because it's got billions of third world immigrants, it's no longer seen as the pinnacle of Europe in terms of, say, international or globalized culture and living. Then all the smart Europeans will just go to America where there's more money, or they'll go to, say, Asia or something, or they'll stay home, or where have you. So you have to understand that London was a big reason for England's prosperity and also its image. And having that shatter by having 10 million Bengalis and Bangladeshis and Pakistanis and other third worlders, fellaheen, means that you are now importing people who net drain, obviously, both on the country as a whole, the budget, but also very specifically making London worse. So that's kind of that manifold pressure you'll start to see. Now, what can be done to fix it? Well, nothing, because the English are zombies. They are not roused for anything except football, beers and holidays to Spain. And you might think this is me being puerile or flippant, but really, truly look at some of the statistics on this, and people will just spend their money, boomers specifically, on their houses when they sell them and things like this, on cruises and holidays. There's no propping up of a younger English, I want to call it the thriving yuppie or bourgeois class, because the idea that you would want to create anything in a country like England is basically gone. So all the value capture is around, say, like real estate agencies or they call it services nowadays. So it's like tech consulting or something like this, where there's no actual generation of, say, a good or material. So if you think in terms of war, which England has traditionally been very good at, and you think of total war in terms of production and industrialization towards a set goal of producing weapons, armaments, and feeding a sustainable population to survive a war, England have gone from being very good at this to being probably one of the worst in the world at this. And even in World War II relied heavily on Big Daddy America to provide for them in many certain ways. So England's ability to withstand any type of external pressure has basically evaporated and liquidated. Now, the modern version of a strong Britain is basically it's not even in joke. It's just a plain joke. The strong Britain basically maintains its farcical presence on the fact it has nuclear weapons. That's it. And it's a big economy for reasons that London can be responsible for. Otherwise, it's very close to being the same tier as, say, somewhere like Poland or Czech Republic. So its relevancy is obviously slipping and dimming back to its just level. So it's the requisite response to being a underfunded, underinvested island, which imports really poor people from all over the world for bizarre reasons to feel good about themselves, results in a crappy country. Surprise, surprise, shock and horror. And you think the English, who have traditionally been very strong, would stand up and do something about this. Once again, you are wrong. And you can see here that I've put some pictures of some men who take umbrage at these ideas of losing Britain. And to be fair, most of them, I think all of them are actually English. But you can see here that the two, I say, most impressive politicians of the last century, Enoch Powell and Oswald Mosley from the UK, both had a energy and vitality which was correspondent to their political actions. Now, they both were unsuccessful, and that should show you why and how powerful institutions were in Britain, in that they would block any type of transformation or reformation or innovation or revolution, because when you have a stodgied and particularly calcified state institutional, particularly goes into its ministries and its bureaucracy, then it prevents these things from happening by dissuading the populace through its popularization of media, and that comes down to basically the BBC, but also other state apparatus around dissemination of information. The British are notoriously bad at understanding propaganda when it's pitted against them in negative ways. Now, I'll read you a quote here. If the practice of lying is the most suitable system for stupefying a people and hardening their spirits, then one can safely say that the people of Great Britain have reached an indisputable and unsurpassable record. The Englishman has no one left. This was written by Benito Mussolini in the 30s. So you can see that there's a tradition of the Englishman to be basically a bit of a dumb retard when it comes to processing information, passing any scrutable texts around what do I actually think about this, rather they're predisposed almost to be what do I do? Please tell me, because they've had a ruling class which has traditionally ruled very well. They've done certain malicious activities and whatnot, and obviously serving themselves before serving their underclasses. But in the directional sense, England's been great because of this operation up until the First World War. First World War was a massive misstep, and obviously, once again, England, not understanding what drove it to its success, participated in something that it felt it was necessary when it probably was not, for its own sustainability or its own growth or its own trajectory, its greatness. Now, can you allow Germany to be a great power on the continent in World War One? maybe you can just do that. Maybe you use them as a bulwark against the Russian menace or the Ottoman menace. Maybe that is the position that you take as a statesman, rather than embroiling yourself in that war in a way that basically threw away a whole generation worth of men, and then followed up with the rest of the rest, or the best of the rest, basically also being thrown away in World War II and expelled or spent. You've also got colonies which produced a lot of hardy and heroic individuals that you also wrapped up in a nice consumable package and sent out into adrift. So basically all the blood of the Englishman that was vital and vigor and, say, visionary is gone. It's absent and was liquefied by these two world wars. Worse than Germany. And you might think that Germany, with its dissolution of its entire state and being in the complete destruction of anything that was seen as a core German-Prussian identity, vanishing would be worse, except Germany today is still a better country than England in almost every measurable metric. So you can't really say that England was better off from having won the world wars, which is obviously very dismal. So going back to this Mussolini quote, though, we can see why that the Englishman is so ill-prepared for this state of affairs. It is incapable of producing and implementing modern politics. It's incapable of understanding them, and it does not want to change because it's too difficult to wake yourself from something like this. Thus Spake Zarathustra is a lot around waking up from the spooks and what you would consider the somnambulant version of your life, just sleepwalking through things. The Englishman is so far before this that they're not even prepared to crack open Thus Spake Zarathustra to even understand the preface here, because of how zombified they are. Now, looking at some statistics, you can see here that the main source of news by age group is mostly still television, some social media for the 16 to 24-year-olds, and obviously online is meaningless. Still very prevalent radio and newspaper usage, which is obviously mind-boggling and flabbergasting. But so television being the main proponent for news, and particularly in the older generation, so anyone 45 and older. But there's still a majority of people, even in the cool, hip, right-wing Gen Z, or Alpha, or whatever they are, about 50% still watch news, which is egregious. And then when you look at which news channels they're watching, and mostly it's state-programmed BBC. So yay for us in the YouTube sphere, we're up to, I think, about 19%, but you still have to factor in that there's a divergence between what we call progressive politics and actual, Prussian style, but Gothic and Faustian politics around strong men doing strong-willed things, and you call that right-wing, or you call that whatever you like. There is still not the appetite, more than, say, 20% of the entire population that's willing to stand behind that. And you can see that with someone like Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe is not necessarily a leader type. He's a bit old. He's a bit, I would say, fixed in his ways, and they're not bad ways. They're just not very energizing. He's not an Oswald Mosley type, and that's borne out in just how his demeanor is and the way he's disposed to dealing with things, and that's typically by the process, by the book. The book hasn't been working. So if you think that you're going to make change using the same instruments that your enemies are using, it's not going to work. The idea that you can get through any of these British systems without being denuded, without being muted in many, many ways is impossible. They've designed these things to be strategically bad at operating. So they in the Home Office itself, it's like 50% immigrants or the descendants of immigrants. What anti-immigration policy do you ever think was going to be worthwhile putting through an office that has to now manage things like that? Or the immigration department, or whoever. So the understanding here that you don't even have qualified people in the civil service to carry out remigration. It's not like America where you can have some gung-ho ICE agents go, yeehaw, let's kick these Mexicans back across the border. You go, no, my cousin Ahmed is actually coming here on the boat next week. Make sure he gets through, and then he can stay at my house. This is a massive oversight. The Englishman is very naive, and it's hard to overstate here. So you have these three guys who would call the heads, the Hydra, the right wing at the moment, and not saying that they're necessarily mates with one another. Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, and Carl Benjamin here, but they all produce a similar effect on the same topics, which is to say that they the heralds of maybe a new movement towards slightly more aggressive politics, which is commendable, and I really don't want to be a Debbie Downer about all of this stuff, but it's hard to not be disillusioned when these three are your options. This guy, Tommy Robinson, is a big fan of the third world as long as they support his positions. So obviously very suspect there. Nigel Farage, basically the same thing except more palatable to old boomers because he's a boomer himself. And then Carl Benjamin, who is not willing to risk his cushy newsreader job to actually enact change, so we'll complain about it day in, day out. Now, once again, it's not that I feel like you should find these men reprehensible, the detraction, but it's very clear here that the English operandi or modus operandi around affecting change is particularly ineffectual. It's particularly lazy because you're not only yourself affected by it as an Englishman, you go, oh yeah, we'll change things through the proper channels, has to be done right. Secondarily, you're speaking to a populace who have no notion of aggression when it comes to actual change. English haven't had a revolution in something like 300-400 years. There's no seed here. There's no germination around what's needed to actually topple or revolt. Or so this, like the French, you could say, have an idea here around what a protest could lead to, an insurrection, which could lead to a coup d'état or some version of a revolution. The Englishman has none of this. They're going to protest and potentially try to burn things and riot, which once again is fine. But if you have no plan to convert a riot into something political, then really all you're doing is destroying property, which once again is a little bit of a harming of the English psyche when you think about how the Englishman feels about property rights in general. So this is a kind of, I don't want to call it a despair or bleak picture I'm painting here, but it's a bit more around the reality. Don't expect anything from Englishmen when it comes to taking back their country. It won't happen. And I want you to really embody this understanding. Don't have this hope around England that it can be fixed, it can be saved, because the poison has set in many decades ago. You're seeing the effects of it and they're horrible, but that's because you've been poisoned. Like, you're dying. So yes, these are horrible, horrible symptoms. Yes, we want to try and fix them, but you're already basically terminal. This is the after effect of the diagnosis. Your prognosis is you have 6 months to live, right? Well, you're at like month 5. And you go, no, let's try and do something now. Let's try and fix this. Let's try and avert this. Let's try and revert this. It's not possible. You are surrounded by people that don't care enough to do anything. They think voting is going to fix these problems. They think a corrupt Home Office or a corrupt bureaucracy is going to help you fix the things they don't want fixed. It will not happen. Your system is set up to either promote what is the greatness and the grandness, so it works when it works, and then on the alternate end, if it's going in decline, then it supports that decline. That's how you've set the system up. So you need a new system, but England and English people are not capable of understanding or learning a new system. They would rather sit on their couch, watch BBC, scroll their phone, order Uber Eats, and then book their next holiday to Spain.